Well, if you watched the last video, you know I ran out of time and got kind of quick at the end there because you're all starting to show up for first block. We didn't get to urbanization in that video, which is fine because we didn't actually get to it in class either. So here we go. Urbanization. After the Industrial Revolution, cities started to grow rapidly. As we mentioned in the human population growth and impact video and sets of guided notes, the Industrial Revolution brought about many changes, and one of those changes was the mechanizing of agriculture. Steam tractors and machines made it easier for farmers to plant and harvest their crops. As a result, it took fewer people to work a farm. This meant a lot of people were out of work. They had to leave the country and they had to move to the cities because cities are where the new factories are being produced. And it was in these new factories that these people would find work. So, because of the Industrial Revolution, cities begin to grow rapidly. These cities will have both positive and negative impacts on the human population. The impact, and whether it's positive or negative, depends on how we utilize the resources, manufacture goods, transport materials, etc., within these cities. We're going to start by looking at some of the positive impacts, and then we'll look at some of the negative ones. So, improved infrastructure, that's one of the positive impacts that come with urbanization. Now, infrastructure means a lot of things. It's roads, it's railways, it's busing systems. But at the same time, it's also communication networks like cell phones and internet. All of that is part of infrastructure. And one of the positives that come from building cities is an improvement in infrastructure. With a network of roads and rail and the building of airports, it becomes easier to move food and goods around when you have good infrastructure. And again, good infrastructure would be good roads, good railway systems, airports, ports, etc. When you have good infrastructure, it becomes easy to move food and goods around. It can provide improved transportation. So for people, if we have a good network of buses, a good network of streets, a good network of trains, it becomes easy for people to get from one place to another. Again, infrastructure is more than just roads. Infrastructure includes our communication networks. It's by far easier to build a cell phone network in a city than it is in the country. They simply put the cell phone antennas on the tops of the tall buildings. They don't have to build towers. It's easy to run cables for high-speed internet. If you live in the country, you know one of the hardest things to get is good, reliable, high-speed internet. In the city, you have options. You can have fiber optic, you can have cable internet, you can have good old dial-up internet. You have a lot of options in there because you have a lot of communication networks that you can tap into. In the country, you just have to wait for Starlink. All of these things can improve the standard of living for humans. So they are all positive impacts. There are negative sides to urbanization as well. As we know from the lab that we did, when population density is high, when you have overcrowding, you can have an easier spread of disease. It is not a surprise that pandemics start in cities. Urbanization can lead to lacks of resources like food and clean water. You have to make sure your distribution systems are up to the population that lives in that particular city. And if those populations grow too fast, it can put strains on those systems. This is especially a problem in developing countries. The cities grow very quickly because their agricultural bases are diminishing. More people have to move to the cities to find work. And because they're developing countries, they don't have the money to put into clean drinking water and sewage sanitation. They don't have the money to put into the infrastructure to move food around. So you see a lack of resources in some of those cities. Urbanization causes habitat destruction. As cities grow, we need more land for those cities to occupy. And what we end up doing is cutting down forested areas, etc., and destroy ecosystems to build those cities. We have to be careful about that. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't live in cities and we shouldn't have cities. I'm not suggesting that everybody move out of the city into the country. I'm just suggesting that we have to consider that and do it better. Another problem with cities, and it's one that you may not know about, is that they are heat islands. Cities capture a lot of heat and they re-radiate that heat out during the day and overnight. I see it in my drive into work. I live on the outer edges of Anderson. And when I leave Anderson and drive down here to work, I can see the temperatures on my dashboard drop 6, 7 degrees as I'm making my way here. The reason it's much warmer near Anderson is because all the roads that are up there, all the asphalt shingles on the roof, they collect heat while the sun is shining and they re-radiate that heat out all day long, including at night. And it keeps those cities warmer than the rest of the surrounding area. Now, that can be a good thing in the wintertime if you're a person living in the city. But at the same time, that increase in temperature can be detrimental to humans as well, particularly during something like a heat wave, where it's much hotter in the city than it is in the country. Cities often import food, increasing the burning of fossil fuels. Obviously, you can't grow a lot of crops in a city. There have been things that have been introduced, things that people are trying to improve that, like rooftop gardens, urban farms, community gardens, where people are starting to grow more food within the cities. But it's just beginning. It's just in its infancy stage. So most of that food needs to be trucked in, brought in by train or airplane. And that burns fossil fuels, which of course leads to an increase in global temperatures because of all the carbon dioxide. The industrial area of cities can create pollution. Got a lot of factories, you're going to have a lot of pollution. Now, the United States is taking steps to try to reduce that pollution. We put things like carbon scrubbers on the exhaust of factories to try to keep them from putting too much carbon dioxide in the air, for example. And the EPA monitors the discharge of water from factories to make sure that there's no pollution being released into lakes, rivers, and streams. But in other countries, that just doesn't happen. And so the water that's coming out of those cities is just nasty. And cities also produce a tremendous amount of wastewater and sewage. And again, in the United States, we're good at trying to manage that. We're good at making sure that we have decent infrastructure to deal with it. But again, that doesn't happen in every country of the world. Some places you go in the world, there's literally feces in the street, people urinating on walls, because that's just what they do. Again, and that creates problems with disease and issues for humans. So there you have it. Our next section is going to be on pollution. We'll get to that Monday next week.